All right. Well, today we're going to talk about getting sassy with Foundation 4. I'm going to talk about using Foundation and Sass together to make some awesome layouts and write exactly the markup that you want to do. So, quick introduction. My name is Caleb. I am a designer at Zurb in Campbell. We do some cool things. I design various things, and I work on Foundation as well and use it in all of my projects. So that's me. But what we really care about is, what is Foundation? So how many people here are familiar with Foundation or use it? Okay, so a fair number. We're going to run through just a really quick overview of what Foundation is. Foundation is a front-end web design framework. It's a great foundation for building websites. So it's designed to be a good starting point. It has a lot of components built in to allow you to write your markup and get your site's content all built, and then from there you can add in your own design. It's designed to be very flexible, very customizable. At the core of Foundation is a mobile-first responsive grid. Mobile-first meaning the grid and all the components are built with small screens in mind first. And all the baked-in media queries adapt to larger screens, and not the other way around. The philosophy behind that is small screens, mobile screens, are the most constrained experience. So when you design for mobile, you're forced to think about, okay, what is the core function of this page? What is the key action that I need to get across? What is the main purpose of this page? So it helps you to design really simple and elegant layouts that look great on any screen size. After that, we have loads of UI components. So things like navigations, form elements, buttons, typography, everything that you need to start building a basic front end and then add in your own style later. And it's built with Sass. So there is a vanilla CSS version of Foundation, but it's all compiled from what we do in Sass. We love Sass, obviously, because it's awesome. And everything that we build in Foundation is built with Sass because it allows us to create really powerful layouts and customize things really, really easily. All right, let's get sassy. So we have two options to work with when we're using the Sass version of Foundation. We have Sass Standalone, which doesn't rely on Compass or any other external library. It's just the SCSS. And then we have the Compass extension. At Zurb, we always use the Compass extension because Compass is amazing. It gives you access to all kinds of mix-ins and functions. But some people don't like Compass. Some people like Bourbon. Some people have their own library that they use. And we want you to be able to use Foundation with your own library as well. So we do offer the Sass Standalone. Sass Standalone, it's the lowest denominator. There's no dependencies. So you can use it right out of the box. It gives you all the core Foundation files in your project directory, so you can look at them and you can edit them. You shouldn't edit them. It's not recommended because if you want to update Foundation later or change something, or if you mess something up, it's going to be a lot harder to fix. But the best practice is to override these settings rather than edit them directly. And you can find this in the Foundation GitHub repo. Just change the branch to SCSS Standalone, and you'll be able to download just the Sass and JavaScript. But with the Compass extension, we can create a new project straight from the command prompt. So just open up your favorite CLI, and you can create a new project straight from there. And with the Compass extension, the files are tucked away where you can't touch them. Where it is depends on your development environment. But the point is that it's tucked away separate from your project directory, so you can't edit the Compass of the Sass files directly. So it makes it really, really easy to update things, and there's not really any chance of you messing anything up. All right, let's look at how to create a Foundation project with Sass and Compass. So the first thing we need to do is to install the Foundation gem. So just open up Terminal and type in gem install Zurb Foundation. If you're on Windows, you do need to have Ruby installed, but otherwise it's pretty simple. And then you'll get a message saying that it's fetching everything and it's installing. And then once you have Foundation installed, you type in gem install Compass to get Compass on your system. And again, you'll get a similar message. And from there, we have Foundation and Compass both installed, so we can create our project. So we want to CD into wherever your projects folder is. For me, it's always my sites folder, but people keep their sites in different places. So navigate to your project directory. And then from your project directory, you type in Compass create project name, our observed Foundation using Foundation. And from there, that'll create your project, and then you just navigate into your new project folder, and then type Compass watch. So that way you'll be watching your projects, and Compass will convert all the SCSS that you write into CSS that the browser can read. And then you'll get a message saying Compass is watching, and you can learn more about Compass at compassstyle.org. All right, so you can organize your project however you want. There is a basic GitHub repo up on GitHub for the Foundation course, and you can download the projects at this URL. I'm going to send out the slides later as well, so you can always check it out. In the Foundation course repo, you'll get the index, JavaScript, SCSS, CSS directory, and also an examples directory. I'm going to show several small examples of how to mock up different components of Foundation with SCSS, and those are included in this directory as well, so you can kind of poke at them and see how they work. All right, the first Sass thing we're going to look at in Foundation is the settings files. So the settings files contain changeable variables for almost every component, every element in Foundation. It saves a ton of time because you can go into this file and change values, change settings of predefined variables without writing any SCSS. So it's a great way to right away just kind of go in and change things and get a fairly customized look without hardly writing any SCSS. It also helps you override less SCSS because rather than writing your SCSS directly, you're just overriding existing variables. So here's an example of different variable settings. And here we've changed some. So there's the body font color, font family, various colors in the site, header font colors, header styles. So here's a basic look. So here's a look at a basic Foundation page. This is what Foundation looks like out of the box. It's pretty plain, pretty simple, designed to be pretty easy to customize. With the settings, we can alter them and create a pretty customized page pretty quickly. So you can see here we've changed the background color, the headers, the panel styles. So it's a totally different looking page with just altering a few variables. So that's the first way that we can really leverage the power of Sass to create custom pages in Foundation. So we're going to go through 5 Foundation components and move kind of beyond variables and talk about how to use mixins to create Foundation components, writing whatever markup you want. The reason we're just going to do 5 is obviously, time constraints, and also we want to kind of dive in depth a little bit on each of these components instead of just giving a broad overview. A quick note on ems. We use ems quite a bit in Foundation to calculate values. They can be kind of a pain to work with. Some people aren't comfortable working with ems and like to use pixel values or some other unit values. We have a function in Foundation to help you out with that called mcalc. It takes your desired value, so if you want to use your pixel units or anything, it divides that by the body font size and it spits out an m value. So you can do mcalc 12 pixels, and it will give you the m value for that.
Can you tell us why y'all chose ems?
Because ems are relative to different like whatever's around them. So for things like buttons, for instance, when we like change the padding or change the size of the button, it's a lot easier to dynamically change the size of the font as well to make it more relational. And like M's make it much easier to make spatial relationships a lot easier. So that's the main reason why.
So it's a little more flexible than pixels.
Yeah, it's a little more flexible. It's not precise like a pixel, but since Foundation is mobile first and like more interested in being responsive and fluid, we don't worry so much about like being pixel perfect or like precise pixel values. We're worried more about like spatial relationships and making things look proportional. So that's the idea behind M's. All right, so here's the basic markup syntax for the grid. The grid is made up of rows and columns, and traditionally we've used presentational classes like these to create the grid. So you'll define a row, and then you'll define your columns. And this works great, but let's look at how we can write our own markup with our own class names and still get the same result. Like especially here, if we're like adding behaviors to rows, we're adding media queries for like different columns on different screen sizes and offsets for things, it can get really bulky. So the big advantage with SCSS is that we can keep our markup really, really clean and really, really semantic without all these presentational classes and still get a great result. So the first thing, we do have a handful of variables for the grid. We have the row width, which is the maximum width of the row. It's not the absolute row width. It's the max width that it will be. So when you expand your browser all the way out, the row is going to stop at like 62 ems. But this can be 100% if you want your website to be full screen. It can be whatever you want. Gutter, pretty self-explanatory. And then columns. By default, the total columns in the grid are 12 because 12 column grids are pretty common. People are used to working with them. But you can adjust this to be 16 or 20 or whatever you want. All right, so let's look at container row markup. So if we're going to build a row with mixins, this is all we need. We need an element, and we're going to give it a class of header to be semantic, to describe like what it is and not what it looks like. And to make this behave like a row, we need to include the row mixin. So we'll select the header and we'll do include grid row, and that will give us a nice container row right here, ready to put columns into. Now to put columns in here, inside of the header we might have a logo and a nav. Super clean markup. Let's look at how to make these into columns. So inside of the header, we're selecting the logo and the nav, and we're passing the grid column mixin to each of these elements. And we need to define how many columns each element takes up. So we have an argument called columns, and we pass a value to each of these. Since our amount of columns is 12, we need to make sure that our columns add up to 12, or at least don't exceed 12. And that'll give us, where's my mouse? This right here. So you see we have 4 columns, 8 columns. We've got a nice gutter, and it's fluid. Since we didn't specify any media queries, it stays the same when it's large or small.
12 columns is default?
Yeah, 12 columns is the default, but again, you can change it to whatever you want.
And this grid row mixin makes it so you don't have to use the row class? You
Yes.
build it into the...
Yeah, you can name it whatever you want, and you just target it in your SCSS, and you just pass the grid row mixin.
You don't have to use the $ columns though, colon.
Columns is the argument, and colon is the value.
But I don't. The current foundation I'm using, I haven't been doing that. I'm just putting 4.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Interesting. I've always done it this way.
Yeah, that's actually the first time I've seen that. It's cool.
Okay. I learned something too. Cool. All right. Center columns. You can also center columns inside of your row, or you can center a single column. You can't center a column set, so if you have more than one column inside of a row, you can't center both of them. But if you have one column inside of a row, you can center that. if you do want to center multiple columns, you can maybe nest another row inside of a single column and then have multiple columns inside of there. But we're going to look at just how to center a single column. So again, here's the markup, super clean. And then we're going to center logo, so we need to pass a behavior argument to it. So we'll say center true, and that will give us centered columns. Like this right here. So here's 3 columns centered. Here's larger, like 6 columns centered. You can also offset columns in your markup. So if you want maybe a larger gutter between your sidebar and your main content, if it's like pushing too close and you want it to be further away, you can offset your columns. So the way that we do that, so we have an aside and an article here. The way we'll do that is on the article, we'll pass the offset argument and give it a value of 1. So this is the offset value is also part of your whole column value. You want your offset and your columns to all still not exceed 12. So we have 8 and 1 is 9, and then 3 for these sides. That's still 12 columns, but we'll get a little offset. So there'll be a little more room to breathe between the main content and the sidebar. So some examples of offsets are in here as well. So right here, like this is offset by 1 column. This is offset by 3. This is offset by 6. Alrighty. Media queries. We can use media queries to change how the grid behaves between different screen sizes. So we'll be using the same mixins within any media context. It doesn't matter. But we can create layouts that shift between different screen sizes. And then again, since we're using mixins here, you don't actually have to make your media queries mobile first because we're writing our own. But again, since Foundation is built in the spirit of mobile first, so we definitely recommend starting small and then expanding out for the best results. So here's an example of media query markup. Again, it doesn't really look any different. All the styling is done in SCSS. So at the top, we have just our normal mobile first default columns, so 8 and 4. But we're specifying, a few media queries, and within there, we're kind of playing around with how the columns are behaving. So in one of them, the columns shrink down to 2, and we're giving one an offset. But then when the screen gets bigger, we're going to nullify the offset and say that it's 0, and we're going to give both columns a width of 6. So an example of how that works, how that behaves, is down here as well. So here you see there's media queries, and right now it's even. They're both 6 columns, but we can shrink down and they'll kind of shift around. One has an offset, but then when we get smaller, they shift back over. So just a quick example of how you can change your layout with media queries. And you can use, as many media queries as you want and do whatever you want. It's advisable not to get too crazy and use too many media queries, but with Sass, the power is there.
So you just write the straight media query?
Yeah, there are actually media query variables in Foundation that you can do as well. But for this example, we're just writing the straight media query.
Could you use breakpoint with this? Just toss it in there. Just at breakpoint anywhere. Send it to media query.
Breakpoint, I believe so. Yeah.
The way I've been doing it is in there's a mixin. There's a
yeah.
And you don't have to actually do the EM. You can just do mobile or small or whatever.
Yeah, typically often when I'll write media queries, I'll just do you can just include the small and the medium mixin as well.
And that's in the settings, right? The
Yeah.
size, screen size.
Yeah, and you can change those as well in the settings, where the breakpoints are. All right. We can also do content ordering, moving content around with push and pull. So oftentimes we'll want elements to appear at after, like later on than where they are written in the markup. So on mobile screens, for example, we might have a sidebar like that with the subnav at the top before the main content. But then maybe when it expands out, we want the sidebar to get pushed over to the right and to appear after the main section. And that's possible with Foundation. The way that we do that is, so we have like our side and our main. A side has 3 columns, main has 9. So side's going to appear like over to the right and before the main content. But maybe on bigger screens, we want to shift that around. So what we can do is we can define a media query at a certain point. We want these to shift. So we can push the sidebar over by 9 columns and then pull the main content back. So it'll just flip-flop. So an example of that is here. So you see we've got pull 3, push 9, and it shifts. So yeah, actually, this is mobile first. This is the correct view. So this little guy's going to get pushed over by 9 columns, and this big guy's going to get pulled 3. So if you look again, they'll shift. So it's great for changing the way that your content appears or is ordered on different size screens.
So Foundation handles changing float left or float right also when you do push and pull?
Yeah, you just need to include the push and the pull arguments. Yes?
Compatible with IE8?
No. Foundation 4 is not compatible with IE8. Foundation 3 is. That's probably a different discussion. But it was a conscious decision to drop support for IE8.
It was a good decision.
Thank you. All right, nesting the grid. So you can also infinitely nest your grid. You can have as many grids within grids as you want. So an example of how to do that is here we have our header and our sidebar and our main content, and we've already defined these as acting like rows and columns and everything. But maybe inside there we want another grid, or we want like more control, which you can do. So inside of main content, we might have an article, for example. We might have like a div or a paragraph or something like that. And we want the article to be a row with 12 columns in it. So what we can do with Sass is so we have our main which is 8 columns wide. But the article, we're going to include the grid row mixin, and we're going to pass the behavior of nest. What this is going to do is it's going to tell the row to like shrink down and like behave as if it's nested. And then within there, we include our grid column mixins just like normal. You don't need to pass anything else to them.
So it still equals 12, even though it's nested in 8.
Yeah, correct. Because it's within the context of another row. So anything within the context of a row goes up to 12, or whatever the columns is defined as, because it can change. So an example of that would be here. So you can see this. These are a little bit darker. This is a nested grid, and again, it's fluid. So yeah, that is a lot of stuff you can do with the grid. Pretty cool. Let's move on to buttons. Buttons are another huge thing. Buttons are used everywhere, and we like to have a lot of control with buttons because you need different kinds of buttons for different purposes. So let's look at how to build a button, and we're going to look at how to customize it with SCSS. So here's the basic button syntax. Using presentational classes, it can get pretty bulky because like if we want it to be smaller, we've got to include that class. If we want it to have rounded edges, we include that class as well. We're going to look at how to do all this stuff with just really, really simple markup. So if we're going to build with mixins, we can just keep the markup simple without passing any classes to it. And we have a plethora of variables available for buttons before you even have to get in and like kind of dig in and write your own mixins, or not write your own mixins, include your own mixins. So we have like padding sizes, We can choose how they're displayed, if they're going to be like inline or if they're going to be block and fill the whole screen. We can choose the font styles, other styles, pretty much anything. So the quick way to make a button is to include the button mixin in your class name, and this will give you just the default button. It's pretty basic, but you don't need to pass any arguments here. This will just give you, here it is, the button. But if we want to get crafty, get sassy, we have a ton of arguments we can pass to buttons as well. So you can control the padding, you can control the background, the radius. You can make it full width, which will make it expand to fill its parent. And you can disable it too, which will disable hover actions, and it will kind of make it translucent. One other cool thing to note is when you adjust the padding argument, that will dynamically change the font size as well, so that if you make it like, 100 pixels or something, the font size will adjust to be proportional, which is really cool. So here's an example of a more complex button. So we're including the button mixin, but we're passing a padding argument, a background argument, and a radius argument to create a more stylized button. And here's an example of that. And the text color is changing automatically too, because we have built into buttons. We have a function where we get the lightness of the background color of the button and change the font color depending on how readable it's going to be.
Now, you would still have to include, or would you still have to include the small class, large class, expanded class, or is there a mix?
So what you do for that, it's in the padding. So if you want it to be small, you would include the variable for like button tiny, for example, and that would make the padding really, really tiny, and that would resize the font really, really tiny as well. So it does it on the fly. So
it's, even though it's not like small and large aren't written in there, padding controls that.
Yeah, but you have your padding classes like button medium. So there's like button large, button tiny, that kind of. So like if you wanted to use those values, you could just pass those to the padding mixin or padding argument, but you can include your own value too. Oh, okay, button base. But if we wanted to get really granular, you can also there's separate mixins for each one of these things. We can build a button from scratch basically with a button base, which will just give you like the bare bones. It'll just be like a container like with a border and some text, and that's it. And then we can add in styles. We can add the button size, and we want to pass the padding argument to that. We can change the style with the background and the radius. We can like add the inset shadow, which is that little like shiny like white thing at the top to make it look like a little bit more like a button. And then we can add in how transitions work. So an example of all of these are down at the bottom here. So here's the base button. It's just text and a border. Then if we want to add size, we need to add padding to it. So that's down here. And then we can add style, and then we can make it super fancy and make it have, I don't know if you can see it on there. Make it have like nice hover styles and a little shiny inset shadow and nice transitions. Sweet. So that is the gist of building buttons in Foundation with SCSS. Super customizable. There's a lot of arguments to work with, and you can make a lot of like very different button styles. Button groups. So now that we've made these awesome buttons, let's look at how to make them work as a unit. So button group syntax is pretty simple. It's an unordered list with list items and anchor links that are buttons inside of them. This is the basic like default markup. It's still a little bit presentational, so we can change that to whatever we want. We can call it maybe the toolbar and change the button class names. And it's built on top of buttons. So again, you just create an unordered list. You create your list items, and then you put buttons inside of them. And the classes that you make for buttons, so like all those classes that we made before, will work in a button group. It's super easy. So here's an example of the button group container mixin. So this just defines a whole container as like this has a button group inside of it. And then to apply specific styles to the button group, we actually apply those to the list items and not the container itself. So we need to do the direct child selector of the list items and include the button group style mixin. And then from there, so inside of the button group style, we can adjust the radius of the whole group. So it'll adjust, like, if you pass a border radius, it'll adjust the radiuses, or the radii on the ends, but not each individual button. So it'll like be like one cohesive unit. You can also make it even, so all the buttons will be the same width, and the whole button group will fill its parent. And you can adjust how it'll float, so if it'll float right or left.
So that'll respond to mobile, then that's
Yeah.
going to be responsive.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would use an inline grid for that. And right there, if that's what I'm using.
Yeah, so here's an example. So basic button group, then like here we passed a radius to it, and here's an even button group, so it fills its parent. And it just, they stay the same width no matter what the size is. This would break if you had a small screen and you had like 12 buttons. It would just make each one really small and the text would overflow. So that's worth considering. But if you have like a segmented control on a mobile device, like this is perfect.
For that type of button, would you use href or would you use the input type button?
You can use the button class on an anchor link, on an input button, or on a button element. So it doesn't really matter which element you use.
So is there like a better practice to use one?
It depends what you're using it for. So if you're building a form, for example, it's probably better to use the submit input, right? But if it's just linking to another page, it's better to use the anchor link. So that's the idea behind the practice. All right, alert boxes. Alert boxes are similar looking to buttons. They're similar in how you build them, but they're more of a global element, and they're definitely simpler. So the basic markup for an alert box is you have your class that you want to be an alert box, and inside there you have your message. We have...
Can it be wrapped in a p tag or not? Does it have to be?
Any block level element can be, but you're going to have... Yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah. Wrapped in a p
The
tag?
message.
Oh yeah, it can.
I just saw that you.
It can be. It doesn't need to be.
Okay.
If you wrap it in a p tag, it's gonna like add more margins and padding because there's like some default stuff in there. So you'd have to collapse that, but I wouldn't do it.
Okay.
But you can. You're not restricted. Again, we have a number of variables available for alert boxes. It's similar to buttons. Border, font styles. We also have closed button styles, which we'll look at in a minute. You can add a little like X to close the alert box as well. And to style an alert box, again, we just pass the alert mixin, and that gives us this guy here. We can also just build it from the base. So include the alert box base, and that'll just give us the outline and some text. And then we can style the background color from there. You'll notice that there's not nearly as many arguments for alert boxes as there are for buttons. And the reason behind that is alert boxes we think should be much more of a global element. They're for special moments on a site, like when you get a message, when you get an alert or a notification. So it should be consistent. The user should know immediately what that is when they see it. So we're keeping the size and everything consistent, but you can kind of change the color and the border a little bit. But as long as everything's more consistent, people are going to know what that is more readily. We can also add a close button to the alert box as well. It's just an anchor link with whatever class you want. We're calling it close because that's what it does. It's pretty semantic. And the character in there is just the multiplication symbol because it's a nice symmetrical little square X, but it can be whatever you want it to be. And then we just pass the alert close mixin to the close button.
How does this tap into your colors, like your warning, your alert color, your success color?
You can add whatever like color variable you want. It's like,
So like background.
it's like background. You could say like this could be like alert error or something,
I gotcha.
or it could be a custom error, and then for your background color you would like give it like the error color variable
Gotcha.
or alert color variable or something like that. So you can use your color variables, or you can use a different color. And we can also add a radius to our alert box as well. So examples of alert boxes. See this nice little close button that you can click on. You'll notice that it's not quite vertically centered. That's because it's centered with the box itself, not on the message. That's in case the message goes down like 2 lines or something. The button itself won't really interfere with the message, and it'll still feel in place. But you can always adjust that with SCSS, just like bump it down 1 or 2 pixels with the position relative or something. And last but not least, panels. Panels are another pretty global element, like alert boxes that don't have a ton of arguments, but they're pretty universal, and we'll look at how to build them. So a panel is just a div or anything. A panel can be any element. Recommend you do some sort of block level element or some element that's set to display as block because it's going to contain its purpose is to contain content inside of it. So we're just using a div here because it's generic and we're doing it in a class. And we have panel variables to work with as well. This should look familiar by now. Background and border, layout, font colors. And we have mixin defaults. So if you include just the panel, you'll get just the default panel from Foundation with no special styling or anything. But you can pass arguments to it. You can pass a background and a padding argument, for example. And that'll give us some custom panels. Here's an example of that. So here's a basic panel. It's not styled or customized or anything. It's just a default Foundation panel. But down below here, we've added some padding. We've added the background color, and the border color is generated from the background color, so it all stays consistent. So this is an example of a custom panel. All right, so we've looked at the grid, buttons, button groups, alert boxes, and panels. So what about the rest? There's a lot of other components in Foundation. Almost all the UI elements can be built with mixins. All the CSS components can. For things that require JS plugins or things that have a lot of moving parts, many of those still rely on presentational classes for now. We are working on porting those, making those more dynamic and making mixins out of those. With Reveal now, you can create the modals with mixins. But things like Orbit or the top bar, things that are where there's a lot of moving pieces and things that are pretty bulky, those are still pretty set. We don't have mixins, a lot of mixins for those yet. But it's a work in progress. All right, so that's it. Any questions? Any other things you guys want more detail on?
Yeah, you just actually answered the modal question that I was about to bring up.
Oh, great.
Because those seem to be a very common request these days. Everyone wants to go to the third dimension.
Yeah.
So we use JavaScript to do it right now.
Use JavaScript to fire the modal, yeah, but you can. There's mixins available now to.
So you can
write the
take
modal.
out, you can make the HTML more semantic by taking a lot of the classes out and putting them in.
Yeah, you could if your modal was a sign up form, you could call it sign up form, and now we have mixins to add, include, reveal modal, that kind of a thing.
Oh, okay. So you can get more of that into the CSS then.
Yeah.
Mess around with the JS.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, For like modals and stuff like that,
Mhm.
why would you want to? I'm curious as to why you might do a mix-in rather than a placeholder in that instance.
It's a good question. Yeah, why would we want to do a mix-in? In case we want to like include various functionality, if we want to like if we want to have like, for instance, a default modal, but like maybe in one case we'll have a modal plus this and like dynamically change font sizes and things like that. We'd have a mix in for that.
You have really good documentation on your site for it also, for doing this thing.
I was going to say that I've used Foundation 3 many times, and I'm using Foundation 4 on our current application, and it's like amazing. I love Foundation. It's just like
Thank you.
the bomb, man. And the setting, all the Sass stuff you have, I mean, that stuff it's like so fun to use. It's so easy, and I recommend everybody try it. It's awesome. It's a game changer, I think.
Thank you.
I'm an advocate. I learned some new stuff. I mean, I realized that I'm not using mix-ins as much as I should. Because I get in the habit of not using them, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And now I'm like, oh, I'm going to go refactor and bring all that stuff out of that HTML and put it in.
Yeah, it requires you to think ahead a little bit more and kind of plan things out, but it makes things like really easy to change. Like after you have things built, it makes things way easier to customize.
One other
Yeah.
thing, a lot of people that I work with have a really hard time dropping IE8. It's just like an enterprise addiction.
Sure.
So I see you have this IE8 Foundation for CSS. Is that, I guess it's not like a 100%, but
It's not 100%. So we don't officially support IE8. We do have the IE8 Foundation 4 grid, which is a port of the Foundation 3 grid with Foundation 4 classes. So you can include that in an IE specific style sheet. And like there's also what JS plugin was it? There's a few polyfill plugins you can play with
it's just,
to make things work. But we don't
still have to branch through like a little bit.
Cool. All right.
I have a
Yes.
Can you show us like the coolest site built with Foundation that doesn't look like a Foundation
The
site?
coolest site built with Foundation that doesn't look like a Foundation site.
Please go to runway.
Let's see.
A lot of the embassy properties are using Foundation.
The embassy properties.
Yes, like
Oh,
they're all based on the same libraries, so they're all producing for the TV billboard.
What was yours?
They use embassy.
Runway, RUN.
They use Foundation.
Oh,
Yeah, there it is.
So this one uses a lot of, to answer your question, this one uses a lot of components from Foundation. Can you go to click on clothing or something?
Sure.
So they have a feature called block grid where you can place like n number of elements. So there are like 4 elements there, and there's like you can customize it for large and small. So when you resize it, actually on a tablet, it shows you like 2 elements per row. So there you go. So and then when you go to a mobile, it shows you. So we extended that to an extra small screen. So on a mobile, it shows you just one, and we have an off-canvas layout for the filters.
You hear the argument a lot. It's like, oh, I don't want my site to look like Foundation, or I don't want it to look like Bootstrap, or whatever. I think that's a BS argument because.
Well, Foundation is built specifically so that it doesn't look pretty out of the box. Like it's very basic. It's built because with the idea that you're going to like go in and customize things. It's built for that purpose to make it as easy as possible.
Yeah, and I chose it because I was like, I need that. I was going to either build all these things from scratch and basically build my own foundation, or just use Foundation. So I was like, it was a no-brainer because there's so many things in it, that you're going to end up building anyway.
This is also built in Foundation. The Treehouse marketing site, not their whole app, but the marketing site is built in Foundation as well. Foundation 3, I think, so it's a little bit older, but still the same components.
I have another question for you.
Yes.
I'm sure you get this a lot. What's your take on Bootstrap versus Foundation?
Bootstrap is less.
Well, Bootstrap is on less.
It's also on Sass. They have a Sass.
They have a Sass version,
Sass branch.
but officially it's less.
Yeah.
Like, the official code is like,
I haven't. So, in all fairness, I haven't actually. I'm not up to date on Bootstrap 3. So I can't quite speak to that. But Foundation is, again, like it's built to be highly customizable. It's built so that you can like put your own design on top of it. Whereas Bootstrap is like super shiny out of the box, and its purpose, we see it as more of kind of like to have something that looks great out of the box, but that looks like very bootstrappy. That looks like has a very distinct look, and it's I mean there's like apps out there to customize it and stuff, but like it's not as easy to do out of the box. Whereas Foundation is designed specifically like to put your own design onto. So that's the basic thoughts. Anybody else? Any other questions?